We're going to move now
Yeah.
to your parents
Okay.
to focus on them. Describe your mom.
My mother was a wonderful, wonderful person. She was very lively. She liked happiness, joy. She liked to be happy. My sister seems to think that she was bipolar, but I didn't feel that. She worked very hard. It wasn't easy during the Depression for her. She
Now,
made...
she was the youngest, right?
My mother knew her. She had a younger brother who died before. Unfortunately, they didn't know what they do now, so he had a brain tumor, and they had 3 operations. He died. He left 2 very young children, as a matter of fact. But she wasn't the youngest. But she claimed that when my grandmother gave birth to her, because they were born in the United States, those 2 children, she was so tiny and frail that my grandmother used to put her in like a wad of cotton in the oven, you know, and they, I don't know whether inhaling some of that stuff that is what caused the problem she had later on, but she was certainly a very good, dutiful daughter. They all were. They had a great deal of, they were in awe of their parents, you know. And she was attractive. She had great legs. She was attractive, and the thing, I noticed things about my mother, like she was a great cleaner. I've told that story many times, how she would stand on the kitchen table and reach up and wax the ceiling with Johnson's paste wax, so that when we sat and ate, we could look up at the ceiling and it was like a mirror.
Describe how she used to clean the floor.
And also, she had, in one room, she had wooden floors, and she used to bleach them down and then put on the surface to give it a brand new, shine. The kitchen floor was linoleum, and she had a routine. You had, because I was indoctrinated into it, first you had to sweep it.
Now, this was once a week, right?
Oh, no. Well, once a week primarily, but so you had to sweep it first, then you had to wash it, then you had to rinse it, then you had to wait for it to dry, then you put on the wax. When the wax dried, then you had to put on newspapers. And heaven help if you walked on the paper and tore it. And then the next day, she had to pick up the newspapers and sort of with a soft mop go over it, And then the following day, you start the same routine again.
Oh, my word.
Oh, yeah, except for, Shabbos. We didn't do anything on the Sabbath. But certainly that floor was done on Friday, and, depending upon whether anybody dared to spill anything on it. And she was so clean about everything that we were not allowed to have water at the table. If we wanted water, we had to go to the sink and have a glass there, because invariably somebody would spill the water. That's it. That was like a sin. She had her own deadly sins. But she sang. She sang while she was working. That was nice to hear, because she did have a nice voice, And she was a great cook, great baker. I felt a little bit superior, because in those days we went to neighborhood schools. So we came home for lunch, and all my friends would have sandwiches. Well, I didn't really know what a sandwich tasted like till I went to high school. Then she would make it. She would make the sandwich, and then she would put in a little wax paper some salt, or she would put in a toothpick. And she wrote what it was, and she wrote my name on the bag. It always was well planned, a fruit, something, and 5 cents to get maybe milk. It usually was dairy that I got, She would make, whether it was tuna fish or a piece of fish that was left over. But during the years that I came home for lunch, the typical lunch I had was freshly squeezed orange juice and a lamb chop, mashed potatoes with chicken fat, and peas and carrots, and or sometimes a baked potato, and Jell-O, or applesauce or something. I had that. That was the lunch I went back to school on. In the morning, I had to have hot cereal, and to save time, the egg went into the cereal and had such an odor. But anyway, I did have it with cream and sugar and butter and all. She really believed in it. She never pushed, we didn't have salads because she felt that was just good for decoration. And they didn't have any value. She went through a period of, I forget the name of the doctor, Kretschmer. Anyway, there was a grain she put into everything, even into her chopped meat, even into the ice cream. Oh, we always had to have that.
Like bran?
Well, it wasn't bran, it was some kind of like grain that was
Wheat germ?
supposed to be good for you. Wheat germ.
Ah.
That's what it
My
was.
dad went through a period like that
Kretschmer's
too.
wheat germ.
That's it.
Everything we had Kretschmer's wheat germ. Because she would listen to the radio and listen to this doctor. So she, but I admired, and I want this to everybody to know, my mother would work very hard cleaning. That was her whole thing, cleaning, baking all day. But at a certain time, she knew to leave herself time, she would stop and change her house dress, freshly starched, clean house dress, put on a little lipstick, because my father was coming home. She never said it to me, you know, but I noticed that. And as a child, I understood that she was doing something special, you know, my father. She was very highly temperamental, emotional. That's why my sister thinks, you know, that maybe she had bipolar. And
But she might have been getting sick at the point where your sister,
well,
maybe?
and but what I also noticed is that my father had a wonderful way of handling it, because sometimes she would start at this level, and it would get worse and worse. And what he would do quietly, he would go to the hall closet where his coat was or jacket, put it on, quietly close the door, and go for a walk around the block. And it always worked. Not only did she calm down, but invariably she would quickly bake something quickly when he came home to give him. And I noticed that they never discussed it with me, but I saw it time and again. The main thing was that he didn't
engage in.
argue with her. He just took a walk. Not that he liked it, but you know, he felt that she needed that cooling off, and it did work. It did work with her. Her children came first. You know, we always had a new dress for the holidays. I remember seeing she would take her dress off and turn it inside out, put it on a hanger, and then open the window so that the fresh air would come in for the dress. She used starch and bluing and all that stuff, you know. My mother used to iron shoelaces. Yeah. She also ironed diapers until somehow a question came up when she was at the doctor's. He said it isn't good to do that because from the iron you can get certain. So,
Oh, really?
so she just ironed it with her hands. You know, every diaper was ironed. She was meticulous about a lot of things. My mother cleaned the inside of the radiators and stuff like that. I saw, oh yeah, I know how to clean, not that I followed suit. But my mother indicated when she got older, she quoted to me, she said, don't be like I was. It's crazy. I can't help myself. But don't be like that. So she was the one that said to my father, because he thought that I graduated high school, I was 16, And he thought the best thing for me would be to go to a business school and become an executive secretary and be able to travel, make a good living. And my mother said, Jack, she's only 16 and she gets such good marks. Let's give her a chance and send her to college. So I went to a city college and I lived at home. But it might be amazing to somebody who looks at this. The tuition was $3 a semester. I think we paid maybe $1 for the gym, but $3 a semester. That opened a world to a family. I was the first one in my family to go to college. I'm talking about all my cousins, you know. None of them. My Aunt Molly's boys did very well. They went to school. And so I'm grateful to my mother for a lot of good rules that she gave me. She was strict. You know, she would require that I get the clothes that I was going to wear the next day, barring a sudden change of temperature, you know, and have it ready on my chair, so that when I woke up in the morning, I had one. And it is a good idea. But she would come in to check on me, and in those days, in the winter, we wore cotton stockings. If one of those stockings was on the floor, she would wake me up to put it back on the chair. Her feeling was that if I did it, I would be more careful the next time and not let it fall on the floor.
How many of her rules have you maintained nowadays?
Not consistently. I know that, but I know she was right, and I try for it. It is true. Life is easier if I get this stuff ready beforehand. You know, she was a great proponent of when she'd say before we leave, do you have to go to the bathroom? Do you want to go to the bathroom? I don't have to. Then she said, when you have to, it's too late. Go. Invariably, she'd be right. The only way I got away was my brother. He got away with it. He would say, no, I don't have to go. The minute we hit the street, he'd say, I have to go, you know. But that was another thing. She loved all of us. There was no question she loved us all for different reasons. And so, but there was something about Morty, maybe because he's the boy, that he could get away with things. Like, he had a habit of calling her Moose. And I'd say, Mom. And she would laugh. Mom, do you know what a moose looks like? She'd say, yes. I saw it on the sardine can. There was moose back there, the sardine. And he could get away with it, but not my sister or I, you know. So that was there's lots of good stuff I could say about my mother. I was very proud of her when she'd come to school. I mean, the way she looked, you know. Remember, my mother took care of Stephen so that I could go to work, to the point where when he had the measles, she got into the crib with him to amuse him. And I remember her saying to me, you know, Goldie, you gave birth to him, but he's like a vein in my arm. Yeah, she loved that little boy. I didn't get that appreciation till I became a grandmother. Oh, I love that one, yeah. And I deliberately gave them my aunt's names. My mother had 3 sisters, Molly, Fanny, and Annie. Well, anyway, apparently these 3 widows lived together in a house. And they were looking at television one night, sitting in their bathrobes and, you know, nightgowns. And Molly got up and said, you know, I feel like having a bath. So she goes upstairs, and the bathroom happened to be just as you got off the landing, the first door to the right. And she said, now wait a minute. Am I going in or coming out? She calls down, Fanny, Fanny. Fanny comes to the bottom of the stairs. What? Did I take my bath or am I coming out? Fanny said, wait a minute. You know I can't hear so well. So Fanny walks halfway up the stairs, and she stops and says, wait a minute. Was I going up? Was I going up? Annie, What do you want? Annie, come here. Was I going up or was I going down? She said, you were going up. What's the matter with you? Boy, thank God I'm not like the two of you. Who is it? I used to talk about those aunts so that my friend Pat had 3 goldfishes. She named them Molly, Fanny, and Ann. At any time, any particular time, that's on my mother's side. I told you about how well my father's siblings got along. But these two were always embattled. And they'd speak about, they wouldn't make up until there was a funeral. And then they'd fall in each other's arms. Funeral, somebody else, but, they'd make up. And then they'd be against the other third one. Now, my mother, being the 4th daughter, she stayed out of it. And Saturday morning when my father went to synagogue was my mother's time to speak to her sisters. So they'd call her up to complain, And I'd listen to my mother, and she'd say, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I know. She'd agree with whoever was on. Then that one would hang up, the phone would ring, it was the other one. And she'd say the same thing to the other one. And I remember saying once, I had the nerve to say to my mother, Ma, how could you tell one she's right and then tell the other one she's right? What do you want me to get hit, she said. I said, if they ever get together, you're in trouble, and they compare notes about, But she stayed out of the battles, but they always, and an interesting thing, each one had a daughter, and when those girls grew up to be adults, they did the same thing as cousins. They either loved each other or they were on the outs, speaking of families. I told you, I really was very inspired by the family. Remember, my grandparents and my uncles, everybody was observant to an extent. My father more so. But he was not strict in the sense that my father understood that on Saturday it would be advantageous for me to take the train and go to the museum. He looked the other way, so to speak, even though I wasn't supposed to do that. He didn't make a fuss about it. We just didn't discuss it. But I had great respect for the religion. I thought there was a lot of good in it, especially, the part about doing good deeds. And
but not you, your mom. What was her inner relationship to the faith? Your mother.
My mother's to religion?
Yeah.
Oh, well, having been brought up in that very strict house, she sometimes overdid it. For instance, my father thought she did. She had 2 jars of mayonnaise, 2 jars of mustard. One was dairy mustard, one was meat mustard. He thought that was overdoing it. She was meticulous about the kosherness of it. However, there was a time when they thought that bacon was very good for children that had a problem with nourishment. And I was anemic. I was diagnosed anemic at one point. And she gave money to a neighbor to buy the bacon, and I'd eat it in the neighbor's house because she thought that would build me up, Yeah. She did that. I don't know if my father knew. I think he did. I don't think she kept it a secret, but he didn't make a fuss because it was supposed to be good for me. And she felt.
Did she go regularly to worship? The shul? Did she go regularly to the shul?
No, my mother went certainly on the holidays. There was a rabbi who gave the sermon in English. It was the conservative rabbi in the Bronx, and she preferred going to hear him, although she understood the Yiddish very well, but she just preferred that. So on the high holidays, she really believed that, and I believe that too, that the important role for the woman is the home that she provides for her husband. Because no matter what his occupation is, in his house, he is king. I don't mean a despot, but you know, he is king. And so the house always was inviting, was clean, there was always something good to eat, and that was more important for her. So on Saturday, and since it wasn't necessary in the Orthodox for the women to be counted, that would be her time to relax. Actually, she spent that, you know, speaking to her three sisters, they call her. That was the Saturday morning while the men were at the service. But so I got a sense of.
Did she pray?
Yeah.
Did she pray?
Well, Friday night, Friday night. But she didn't. I had an aunt, one of my aunts, and my Aunt Fanny was the great one for saying prayers. But my mother would laugh at that. She was amused by that because she felt that was just show. She didn't feel that my aunt really lived by it. But
when did you become aware that she was getting sick?
You know, she was working at the time for New York Life. She had a clerical job. And when she started to call me, and I lived around the corner then, to ask me, what day is today? Or if I went to the house and she'd say, oh, I'm so tired, I just got through washing the floor, and I looked at the floor, it had not been washed. And my father noticed that sometimes the meat was especially salty, which meant she salted it and forgot, did it again. So that's when, and she was 55. She was young. She had
How old was she when she died? How old was she when she died?
67. And then I noticed she was making mistakes on the phone between the O for the operator and the letter O. Her handwriting started to change. And one time when we lived about 4 blocks away, I was watching for her from the window, and she went right past my house. So we knew something was not quite right. What happened was that she had an accident, and over the stove in the kitchen, there was a cabinet. And she had a way of making chopped liver, because according to kosher, you don't cook organs, you have to broil them. So she would take an asbestos and put a wet piece of a bag over it on the stove, and put the chopped liver, the liver that she had salted and all that, on top of that, and the steam would come up and it would cook it a little, and then she'd turn it over. But she jumped up at that part to get something from the cabinet above, and her apron caught fire. And she had a 3rd-degree burn. So much so that it didn't hurt her. It was that deep. So they did some grafting, and after that I had to take her back, for checkup. And when which I'm thinking of doing for somebody else, they had her draw a clock, but she put the numbers on backwards. Some of the questions she answered very well, like who the president was, but they could see by the x-ray that it had moved. There was like a shadow. They showed it to me, and they told me. People in those days did not know the term. They thought I was saying old-timers. And I remembered when the doctor at Montefiore, not Montefiore, I think so. What was the one, the Jewish one up there? Yes, it was Montefiore. I'm thinking Misericordia. At Montefiore said that it's only a matter of time, and it's going to get worse, to prepare me for that. And I remember thinking That's not, he's a young snot. He doesn't know he's talking about my mother, but he was right. So she got to the point where when we were in Europe with Stephen, she was put in a nursing home and she got hurt, she fell or something, and they put her in the Einstein, and she never came out of there, that's the way she was for the rest of her. And little by little, different faculty. When we first were there, we were able to take her home. My father was still working on the weekends, on holidays, but little by little it became very difficult for Papa because she was stiff, and to get her into a shower and all that. So we just visited her, and at that point, she didn't complain. So that was that. But now, the one thing about my mother, if we went over to kiss her, she'd say, "Don't kiss me, be a good girl." And I would say, but Bernice's mother always kisses her every day when she goes to school. She said, "That's just perfunctory. That doesn't have any meaning." So whenever she did kiss me, I knew it had meaning. But maybe on a birthday or just be a good girl. And on the other hand, Papa was always always welcomed us. So we got it from my father, that he allowed us to hug him and kiss him. And he was the softer of the two, actually, yeah. He was not strict. But I will tell you that if my father said, "I didn't expect that of you," it was far worse than any one of her slaps. Far, it went much deeper, because she would forget about it, like you'd almost pray, all right, let her finish, because she had a habit of bringing up what happened 6 weeks before. She never forgot the sin that you committed, So, but Papa gave us that softer side, and he's the one that the classical music station was always on, except of course Saturday or holidays, but it was always on. And I was always amazed that my father, who had no formal education, enjoyed the music that much and brought that into our lives. He was supposedly a very bright young boy, and if they could have afforded it, he was rabbi material, but they couldn't afford to send him to that. He was the oldest, so he had to help him,
So he came over when he was 16, right?
17.
17.
Papa was very involved in the burial society they belonged to. When people came from Europe, from different towns, one of the first things they took care of was to form an organization and buy a plot of land in the cemetery. Because, see, we have to bury them the next day. You have to be ready for that. So Papa always was involved, and his brothers too, in that burial society of Krasny. And he had the map where everybody was supposed to be buried. So he was involved with that. But he would ask us to help him, and send out cards and stuff like that. And my mother always gave him a hard time about that, but she did it anyway. He said, "Your handwriting is better." She did have a nice handwriting. And he was involved with that. And, but he tried to teach you, that you have to take rest. You have to. He was an admirer of Aristotle, and Aristotle said, the mean in everything. You shouldn't laugh too much, you shouldn't cry too much, you shouldn't eat too much, and so forth. Try to, have that as a guideline. So you shouldn't work too much. You have to rest. And he'd come home so tired from work, because after that, then he'd have to go on the subway to come home. And sometimes I remember him just laying down for about 10 minutes before he went to eat, you know.
Did his work involve bending over a table?
Yes, and unfortunately, so did everybody around him, and they usually had cigarettes hanging. He never smoked, my mom. Had cigarettes hanging from their mouths, and he inhaled a lot of that, you know. So
How
he
did that
did
not get
have
on the fabric?
emphysema, you know.
No.
Did have emphysema.
Mm.
One of my nice memories of my pop, and it was during the Depression, was that I knew they didn't have any money. It was my birthday. And he bought one of those, you know those things that you push and sparks come out of them? You know, that from some peddler by the subway. And a ribbon, and maybe one flower or something. And he gave that to me, and he, somehow a little apologetically. And I said, Papa, I don't know what my future holds and what's going to happen to me. I was like 7 or 8. But I can tell you, I will never forget this birthday. You know, it was, I always remember that about my father, you know. And he was the kind of a person that everybody liked, like his father, you know, and his mother. And my friends would make me tell them when my father was coming so they could visit and go into another room with him and talk to him. When I lived in Carmel, all the time, my friends loved my father. It was something, and he would say, when I would tell him after they'd leave, you know, she really likes you. What? What did I do, you know? And he really meant that. I'm just a simple person, you know. He admired educated people. He read every part of the newspaper. Everything, even the cooking column. He read every bit of newspaper, and he read more than one newspaper too. The Jewish one, the English one, and...
What paper did he read? What newspaper did he read?
He read the Day, it was called The Day, because my father was not really a socialist. You know, I forget the Freiheit was really communist, but my father didn't believe in those isms. So The Day was, I guess, more modern, I guess. But he did learn a lot of, like Shakespeare, he read it in Yiddish first. All the Shakespeare he read in Yiddish first, you know, and he loved it. He really enjoyed it. So he read a lot. He really did read a lot.
When did he have time to read?
When he came home, and of course on Saturday. He would read on Saturday afternoon and Sunday. But Sunday, there was always that time when we went down to the grandparents. And he'd be very devoted family to each other. Those brothers and the sisters were in touch with each other all week. And I saw that, I admired. And I thought that every family was close like that.
What would you do when you went to your grandparents? How would you spend the time when you were with
my
your
grandma?
grandparents?
Oh, first of all, there was always food. You know, you always knew. You went there for food. But they would be talking, and the children, me and my cousins, would be in another room, you know, playing games. One of our games was to roll nuts on the floor, whose ever nut went the furthest one, or something like that. I remember that game. But usually the adults didn't like us sitting in the room with them until we had to eat. But, and being with my grandparents and getting those hugs and kisses and what'd you do this week, you know, it was very nourishing, I would say. Fascinating. See, my grandfather, Elia, had a little business in Europe. It just wasn't paying off that much, and, you know, being told by people that had gone to the United States and all that there would be an opportunity there. He went there.
No, this was a shoe business. In Europe, it was a shoe business?
Yes, that's it. They were all, so was my father. When my father first came over, he was in the shoe business. That's what he was trained in. But I guess it might have been taxes or something. The shoe industry moved from New York City to like Kansas City, or, yeah. So the choice was either to move, but my father would never think of moving away from his parents. It wouldn't. So what he had to do, his brother-in-law, Molly's husband, and his brother, Sam, were in the garment industry. They took him up to their place. There were no unions then, and they showed him how to cut the patterns of the dresses and all that. So he had to learn a new trade.
So what was he making? He was making dresses? Women's clothes?
Yeah, he was a cutter. A cutter. And, but also I admired him because he didn't want to compromise his faith to make more money, which he could have, which my other uncles did, but he wouldn't do that. He felt he would make money during the week, and it was interesting because the bosses then had such power, there was no union to argue with them, that they could say, I don't want you to work here, they could fire you. But they had respect for my father because they knew that he wasn't just taking off the week. He really was going to shul. And in those days, they'd get prices like a quarter for a dress, They had to fight for every extra nickel they got because sometimes a different style was a little bit more difficult, But Papa would not compromise, so he was home. And it's interesting to me, if I reflect on it, that he was the oldest of the 5 children, but he lived the longest. Because he knew when enough was enough, he would rest on Saturday. And they were making as much, they did make more money than my father, but it didn't mean as much to him. And we'll manage with what we have. But I saw a lot of the way the family was brought up. They gave for each other. And I know I've told you this story, that when my Uncle Izzy was thinking of opening a shoe factory and he needed money, my mother pawned her diamond ring to give him money. On the other hand, when my father had that season when he wasn't working, that there was 6 weeks. So during the year, they would put aside money so they could pay the rent for the, but then there was food, and my uncle would come to my, I was a kid, but you don't know what kids see, I realized. He would come before that season would start and give my father money, and then when I would see that when that season was over and they went back to work, my uncle would come and Papa would give him, and I always heard my uncle say, "Are you sure, Jack? You sure you have enough?" I mean, I didn't see that on my mother's side. On my mother's side, there were times when my father wanted to borrow some money, they always wanted some kind of collateral. And what kind of collateral? My father didn't even have a car, what kind of collateral? But his side did give money. And my mother's side, they had it, but they were not, I don't know, I'm just saying it's a different thing, but when you think back to the life that they had with the parents, it was different. It was different. Yes, my father firmly, he said that he taught us you have to have faith even when things don't go the way you want. There's a reason for it. We don't know, but always find out what the reason is. Sometimes you do later on, but you have to be strong. And the only time I ever saw him cry, and it wasn't even that, I saw his eyes get very red, was, my grandmother. They loved their mother. They loved their mother and father. So he was truly a believer. I remember him telling me once, I want to quote him, because you ask question. He said, you know, Goldie, you ask a question. One question leads to another question and another question. But the bottom line is, either you believe or you don't. That's the bottom line. I mean, you can ask a million questions, and there are some that we don't know the answer because we're only human. I thought later on in life he would certainly admit that nobody's ever come back to tell us what happens after death. But as my sister said, he was hedging his bets. So we don't know, but what could be bad in living the life that we're told to live? So what? Even if there's nothing, so what? It's not wasted. But there are waste life. He also taught me that laziness is a disease. And I hear him say that to me even currently, you know, when I don't want to do something I should, and I hear Papa saying, Goldie, laziness is a disease. And he's always right. It's always right. If I push myself to do something I should, I never regret it. You know. So when he also taught, nobody taught him, he was a great walker. He liked to walk. And Saturday after he had his nap in the afternoon, he would take a walk. He would let me chatter, and I knew that he wasn't really hearing me, just letting me chatter. But it was great to take a walk with my father. And so every once in a while I would test him. And I'd ask him a ridiculous question. He'd say, sure, you know, he was just saying it. And I knew, Papa, you're not listening. He would giggle, you know. But I never had to be persuaded to go for a talk to him, because he you know, he would point out things to me to look at, things on the way that I shouldn't forget to notice. It's why I understood that they don't drive to shul, that they walk, so you see life, you see what's going on, whereas driving robs you of that, you know. Yeah. And that's a time, especially on the way home, you could talk about what the sermon was, what the parsha was, you know, which they did. That's what the guys did, you know. And that's it.
What about his...
It shows you how beloved he is. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have one of our traditions is to name a child when it's born after somebody that's died. It shows that their soul will have, you know, rest in heaven. We have 4 or 5 with my father's name in the family. You know, I came to accept that I missed my father. He's irreplaceable, but he was 87, and he wasn't really feeling that great. He had a little Parkinson's. You know, when he gave you a cup of coffee, it would shake on the way there. And I think it was just time. It was time for him to... As far as I could have had him for 120 years, but things were breaking down. And you know, one of the things I noticed about my father, that his in-laws, whether I'm talking about Charlie or Michael or Sandy, they loved him. They really did love him. There was something about him that they loved. Oh, yes, that was said. You know, he didn't want to wear one of those things that says, I'm falling. And he didn't want to go into a senior citizen's home. He was able to take care of himself, but he didn't want to do that. So I was visiting you in, I guess maybe that was when you lived in Chicago. Anyway, we had to take a flight. We were going to White Plains. And when I was in the airport, they announced on the loudspeaker, Gloria Block, please pick up a phone. And it was my sister to say that he was in the hospital because he fell on Friday night and he couldn't get up. So he couldn't reach a phone. And he just lay there. And nobody would call him Friday night or Saturday. We just normally wouldn't do that because he didn't answer the phone. So, but when my sister called on Sunday, at first she didn't get an answer. So she tried a little later. She didn't get an answer. She thought maybe he was shopping. Finally, she called a neighbor, and they called from the project the person to come to open it. And they found him on the floor, and they took him to the hospital. So he was...
And he was still conscious?
He was, yes, but dehydrated, you know. And we came home, it must have been on Monday. I went down the next day. Phyllis, my friend Phyllis, took me back to the hospital. And I told Papa that we were going to get an ambulance to bring him up to Carmel the next day. But he didn't last past that. That was enough for him, you know. But he had everything ready for us. It was very smooth. He had taken care of all the arrangements for the funeral, you know. And just to show you, although we haven't come to the relationship of my siblings, Papa had a bank account with my name on it. And Roger, you know, my accompanist, got me over to the bank. I got the money out. And there were certain things like for expenses. And I kept 3 records, one for my brother, my sister, and myself. And when I wanted to show them what I had spent, they absolutely refused to even look at it. Whatever I said was there, was there. They never ever questioned it, and they didn't want to have it. So it came out that each of us got like $300. And then we had, you know, some of the stuff that he had that we wanted to save. But when I hear the horrible things that go on in families, maybe because it wasn't a lot of money, I don't know, but terrible things happen in families with that. But we were not like that, and it would not have been a credit to my parents to have had anything like that happen, you know. Papa left us with, I remember telling him how much, what a wonderful, wonderful father he was. That was, you know, years before he died. And he said, I don't know, Goldie, it would seem to me that if I was such a wonderful father, I'd be able to leave you some money. And I said, Papa, but what you don't understand is what you're leaving me is priceless. You can't put a price on what you're leaving me. All the good stuff that you've taught me, that's my legacy. And my sister feels the same way, and my brother did too. You know, that's the way we felt. But he just felt, oh, if I could have only left you. I mean, it is an old world attitude about that you have to be able to leave it. I have a friend back in Sacramento who lives very frugally because, and you would think he doesn't have, oh, I can't afford to do that, he'll say that. But he has $50,000 in the bank that he wants to leave to his son.
Aww.
Well, but anyway. But, so my feeling is that that's how you live on, in the memory of those you leave behind. And hopefully they're good memories, so that when you're gone, maybe not the first week, but you'll smile.
Yeah.
That's it. You want people to smile when they think of you.
So tell us how he met your mom.
Oh, that's a lovely story. Well, they both lived on the east side, and that's an interesting story because my mother kind of liked this fellow. He was a Jewish fellow, but he was American. And her parents were very prejudiced. They really didn't want her to marry an American boy because my Aunt Fanny, my mother's sister, had eloped, of all things, with a Jewish boy, but had eloped. And they were so upset about that they insisted that she get married, you know, with a rabbi. And Fanny was the one that said the Psalms and all. But, so when my Aunt Molly got married, Fanny came along. She always resented that she had to share the wedding with her sister. So because my mother's parents were very prejudiced, because Aunt Fanny had married this fellow, eloped, and that marriage, that was that brilliant boy that I told you about, little boy that died of meningitis, and it broke up the marriage, and they got divorced, and which furthered their my grandparents' prejudice about American Jewish boys. So my mother liked this fellow who had some sort of rheumatic problem, and he went out to Arizona, that maybe that air, that desert air would benefit him. My mother didn't hear from him after he left. And so she was in the candy store. They had like a candy store with her girlfriends, and my papa was there, and he said to her, Miss Alton, may I get you a candy? And she said, no. And to herself, she thought, there's a bad expression, mocking, which means somebody that came from the other, that wasn't born in the United States. Oh, that mocking, who does he think he is? Okay. So then she, because she was being pressured at home to get married, so the next time he's taking a walk around the block, and he said, hello, Miss Altman, and she said, hello. And then the third time she said to him, she said, when you see somebody 3 times, they have to treat you or something like that. He said, okay. And so, I don't know whether she had a soda or something like that. And then he asked if, out on a date. And
How old were they? How old were they?
They were in their 20s. My father might have been 25, I guess. Maybe she was 20, close to 22, because I was born 9 months after they were married, as a matter of fact. So the first gift he gave her was, like 3 months, a pocketbook, and then he gave her the ring. And now, what I wanted to tell you, ironically, that those days they didn't go on honeymoons. They got their apartments all fixed up, and that was their home. A week after they were married, this fellow shows up. And, he wished her mazel tov and all, and he said, I wanted to ask you, how come you never answered my mail? My grandmother, because he was American, although she couldn't read English, she knew that was a different kind of envelope. Maybe she asked a neighbor. She destroyed all the mail that he ever sent her. So my mother thought he just lost interest. But she was married already, and it worked out well, but that's the kind of thing my grandmother could do. And by the way, what difference does it make? She felt she was right. You could tell her she was wrong. She was right. But, so that's how they married. And it was a good marriage. No. In World War II,
at that time.
I want you to know, my father was in the civil patrol or something. We thought it was hilarious, He was one of those that had to warn you when they thought there were planes above, because he was anything but military. But they had him. And my mother was such a fanatic cleaner that she cleaned the outside. Yes, and they threatened her. She had to stop shining it because the windowsills gave off such a shine that they were afraid, in the blackout. So you had to stop doing that temporarily anyhow. Well, for my mother, being the life of the party, I think I like to entertain. My father, the music, my love of music. I think I wish I would be more patient. I'd like to have inherited that from my father, but I haven't had enough of that. I think admiration for intelligent people. My parents believed very strongly in who your friends were, you know. And I remember my father saying, "Always go with somebody who's smarter than you are, that you can learn from. That should be your friends." You know, when you're younger, you think, what different, and then they want to know what the background of the parents were. Why does that have anything to do with it? It does. I think so. There was a time when I was clean like my mother. There was a time, but I got involved in other things, and I wish I were a baker like her, but I'm nowhere near, nothing like that. I used to love the smell of her fingers. There's always a faint odor of onion. They taught me, at least my father did, that I should always be in competition with myself. Don't worry about other people. You have to get better and better and better at what you do. So certainly seeing my father reading all the time, and my mother too, and taking me, you know, to museums, and I could feel that approval, although they never advertised it. I remember my mother's neighbor saying, "Gee, you never told me that, you know, Goldie skipped." My mother said, I was standing there, "Self-praise is no praise." I don't have to, but I knew how pleased, how proud they were, and that was very encouraging, you know. I worked hard to please them and to please myself. There's a gratification in doing well, and I'm glad to see that come out in Jason and Alexis. See, that's something, you have to feel it, to feel that joy. And it had nothing to do with what somebody else was doing or being number one or two. That's not it. It was for myself. I really would like to tell a story about my parents so that future generations would know it. It's very touching, but it's very true. When my mother was in the hospital with Alzheimer's, it got to a point where she really didn't know who he was. And every day, it was after he had retired, so he could go every day except Saturday, because at that point he couldn't walk the distance. So this way he took the bus, and he would have a little paper bag, a little brown paper bag. In that bag would be a baggie with a wet washcloth and a jar of Pond's cold cream and a half a banana. And they'd bring him into the reception area, and Papa would first, you know, wipe her face and her hands, and then he would put on the cold cream, rub it in a little bit, and then he would feed her, mash, you know, the banana in her mouth, because she didn't have teeth in her mouth. And one of his close friends told me, and my father wasn't there at the time either, he wanted to tell me the story that he said to my father, "You know, Jack, you go to see her every day, and she doesn't even know the difference. She doesn't know who you are or whether you were there that day or what. Why don't you take a rest sometime? Why do you go?" And my father said, "Because I know that if it were in reverse, she would do the same for me." And knowing my mother and what she did, he was absolutely right. And so he did that for as long as, you know, she lived. And he never wanted to leave her, we would say to come up to us in the country, he didn't want to. He had a feeling that if he went, she would die. And this went on for a while. Finally, one time he gave in, and he came up to us. And that's exactly what happened. She did. She actually, because she didn't know how to swallow, she choked on her own sputum. And so when they called us, she was gone already. And so as sad as it was, I must tell you that Shiva period of, we do it the whole week, of being with my father and my brother and sister was very helpful, very salutary, very calming. People came to visit, but Mama didn't know who we were, and we only thought of all the happy stuff, But I did want to tell everybody that story about devotion, and I know if when my sister sees this, she'll relate to it.